Welcome back, everyone. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Hermansson versus Strickland. Pretty solid card overall. Really hoping it stays intact. But apparently they're not testing fighters in corners who are fully vaccinated, so we'll probably get fewer COVID dropouts. And regardless of how you feel about that, it does look like we'll be getting a bit more stability in terms of these cards staying intact. Anyways, we have a solid main event here. A lot of exciting young prospects making their debuts as well. Overall, I think this is going to be a pretty fun card. Not a ton of name value, but still a lot of exciting matchups, a lot of exciting young guys going to be fighting on this card. We have guys like Rakhmonov, very young, exciting prospect. Going to be going up against Harris, who is, pretty exciting fighter himself, a finisher. And then we got other guys like Gore, who's going to be finally making his UFC debut, and we got Dawodu versus Trizano, another very fun fight, and we also have Julian and Rosa as well. The guy always brings it, and the real cherry on top is going to be the Sam Alvey, who doesn't love a Sam Alvey fight. But enough with that. We got to get this podcast rolling here, and like usual, we got to do the recap. UFC 270, and for better or worse, I do want to keep it transparent, so let's dive right into it. Kay Hansen, Jazz Davicius ended up just taking the shot on Jazz Davicius here. Also took a small poke by Jazz Davicius by decision. Really, the line was just way too wide. At the end of the day, Hansen is moving up a weight class, giving up a ton of size, and if she wasn't able to get this fight to the ground, it was going to be a rough night for her, and Jazz Davicius was able to keep it standing, was able to implement some of her own wrestling as well, and I felt the size difference at the end of the day was too big of a factor here, and that ended up cashing pretty easily. So we move on. Silvana Gomez-Juarez, Vanessa Demopoulos ended up not betting this fight after the line had moved, after the fight got rebooked. So not going to regret it too much, even though Demopoulos did end up winning this fight. I did feel she would potentially be alive for the submission, but I just wasn't sure how she'd get the fight to the ground. But, as it turns out, just getting dropped and having your opponent jump into your guard is one way of doing it. And, she was able to pull it off. Really a crazy comeback there. And really, I actually don't feel too bad about not rebetting Demopoulos, because that fight could have played out so many different ways. But, we did get the one outcome where Demopoulos came out on top. But moving along, Matt Frevola, Genaro Valdez didn't have any action on this fight, but you can kind of see why. This fight was super crazy, a little back and forth, but really it was just Frevola just destroying Valdez, honestly, and it could have been stopped after the third or fourth knockdown. So Valdez showing tremendous heart and toughness, but at the end of the day just was not enough for Frevola, who was just kind of dropping hammers on him. But we move along. Tony Gravely, Simon Oliveira. I did like the Gravely side, but was a little worried he'd potentially get caught in a guillotine, and he was in a few deep ones. But I did say with Oliveira, if he doesn't get that guillotine, he's going to be giving up a very dominant position, and that's kind of what happened the whole fight. He might have had Gravely in some trouble early, but after that deep attempt, it looked like Gravely was just pretty much in control. I don't know about the fight IQ of Oliveira, man. The guy just kept doing the same shit over and over with little success, and I do feel as the fight goes on, it gets harder and harder to lock in that guillotine. So, not the greatest game planning on Oliveira's end. But we move on. Jack Della Maddalena, Pete Rodriguez. I took the under on this fight. I just felt that it was a bit of a squash match, and I did feel that with how aggressive Rodriguez typically starts on the regionals, we see him look to maybe unload and try and get Maddalena out of there. And if that doesn't work, we just see Maddalena start to get his timing down and eventually pieced up Rodriguez, which is kind of what happened there. Rodriguez took a ton of damage early in the fight and eventually got finished. Johnny Barcelos, Victor Henry, pretty bad read here. I ended up putting Barcelos in a parlay. Obviously, that didn't cash. The second leg didn't cash either, so it wouldn't have really mattered. But the cardio of Henry, very on point. The guy was able to just nonstop keep moving forward and throwing, was able to pretty much just outpace and outvolume Barcelos. I thought Barcelos would go to the wrestling and the grappling a little earlier. I thought he'd have a pretty significant edge there, but it looked like he had started to slow down a bit when he did start to attack the grappling, and at that point it was a little too little and too late. So ultimately, not a great read. Maybe we're seeing Barcelos start to decline a little bit. He is getting a little older. I mean, didn't look terrible, but he didn't look great, didn't look as good as his previous performances. But it is what it is. We move on. Michael Morales, Trevin Giles, another fight I didn't really have any action on, but I was on the Morales side, namely because I just felt that Giles is a very unreliable fighter. And, the fight IQ thing definitely showed again. He had Morales hurt early and then decided to clinch up with him. He could have had, I think, opportunities to really pour it on Morales, but just gave Morales time to recover. And, Giles eventually did get caught there, which was another concern, again, with Giles is, the weight cut and the chin, especially coming off of a knockout in his previous fight. Now he's cutting down again. I felt like we're just way too big of liabilities there to be betting him, especially since, we weren't getting a real big plus number next to his name either. And, we move on. Cody Stamen, Said Nurmagomedov. I did end up having about a unit on Stamen to win via decision, but honestly, a bit unexpected how the fight played out. I thought it would go to decision, and that was the second leg of the parlay. I thought it'd play out either a bit more on the feet or we see Stamen go to the wrestling a little more. Did not expect Nurmagomedov to just snap up the submission like that. He hasn't really shown too much of that in his previous fight, so that caught me a bit by surprise. Said, not really known to be a fantastic submission grappler, but the way he snatched up that guillotine was very slick, and the guy does look like a pretty fun prospect. However, I do feel we got a little unlucky here because I think a lot of iterations of this fight we see it squeak towards a decision. But who knows? Cody Stamen, he does shoot a lot of takedowns, and maybe he'll leave a lot of openings for the guillotine. But it was really weird how that one got snatched up. So I don't know if that happens too many other times, though. So whatever, we move along. Michele Pereira, Andre Fiallo took the under this fight, and that I don't think that was a great bet even before the fight played out because if Fiallo did slow down, we could potentially have seen him get finished later in the fight, in the final 2.5 minutes, which would have kind of fucked my bet anyways. But there were, I think, a few moments where if Pereira would have turned it on, he could have maybe got the finish. But just goes to show you why Pereira can't really be bet as a minus 300 favorite. I really don't think you could bet Pereira as a greater than minus 160, 170 favorite because the guy's just way too much of a wild man in there. He went for a couple, jump knees in there when he could have probably just, stayed a little more composed and, started to just pour it on Fiallo a little more. Guy's going for rolling thunders, which, it's a very risky maneuver. You're wasting a lot of cardio on it, and it's a very low percentage move as well. It's very unlikely you're going to get the knockout, going for a rolling thunder. So very flashy, very fun fighter to watch, but not a very reliable fighter, especially at minus 300. So, excited to watch him fight, but I probably won't bet this guy going forward. But moving along into our first title fight of the night, Brandon Moreno, Deiveson Figueiredo. Very fun fight. Very interesting how it played out, right? Because in hindsight, it does look like Figueiredo in that second fight was probably not completely himself. Probably came in with some injury or something was wrong with him because that was a very unusual performance from Figueiredo, and this looked a bit more like him in this fight. But it was a really close fight, reminiscent of the Aldo Font fight where we saw Font, but in this case Moreno, do a bit more in terms of the activity, the volume, but it was Figueiredo that was just landing the heavier shots, and that's what really swung him the rounds. So it felt like, the knockdowns in, I think, rounds 3 and 5 was what, solidified those rounds for Figueiredo. The other rounds were pretty close. I think those could have gone either way, honestly. But it definitely felt like Moreno was, coasting a little bit in there. He didn't seem to fight with a crazy amount of urgency. I think it was only in the 5th round or something where he aggressively went for a takedown. I thought that would be something that Moreno would go to a little bit more, considering that's where he had the most success in the first and the second fights. But it looked like he was content to just kind of stand and strike with Figueiredo, which was a pretty interesting game plan coming into this. Maybe he thought that he was getting the better of Figueiredo in these exchanges, but at the end of the day, it was really the big power of Figueiredo that swung the rounds. But moving along, Francis Ngannou, Cyril Gane. Very surprising fight, right? I was obviously on the Gane side, had a couple of units on him. And, I can't say I'm too upset with this bet because how the fight played out on the feet was kind of how I expected it to, right? We saw Gane just kind of stay on the outside and pepper Ngannou. Obviously, the real shocker here was Ngannou going to the wrestling in the third, fourth, and fifth round, really sealing him the deal. The guy was able to just hit a takedown and get a lot of control time in those later rounds. And honestly, you just can't be too upset with that because we've never really seen Ngannou consistently go to the wrestling. He's hit like one takedown before, and there just wasn't tape to really suggest that he'd do this in this fight. But it happened, and honestly, Ngannou with a bit of wrestling is even scarier now because the guy's just a freak athlete, and even going into this fight, like he had a decent like size advantage over Gane. Like the measurables are pretty similar, but the frame of Ngannou was I think much bigger than Gane, and Ngannou was able to just kind of power his way through to a lot of these takedowns and reversals. But yeah, really crazy to see Ngannou still making these improvements this late in his career after showing just phenomenal knockout power, really early finishes in most of his fights. Just really impressive to see, honestly. As for Gane, I do think he's got a lot of room for improvement as well. A lot more potential in him. The guy at the end of the day, he's only got 11 MMA fights, so I do think we see more improvements from Gane. And I am very excited to see Gane develop more as an MMA fighter because his takedown defense actually didn't look bad. His get-ups looked solid. He was doing a good job of working his way up back to his feet against Ngannou. But at the end of the day, Ngannou was just a little too big, little too powerful for him, right? Anytime Gane was able to get up, Ngannou was able to just kind of pull him back to the ground with, I'd say, relative ease. So I think a lot to look forward to for Gane in his development. But right now, it does look like it is still Ngannou's time because, the guy's shown phenomenal power. And now he could wrestle a bit too. I don't know who's going to be able to really challenge him at this point, So really great card overall. Not a great night for me, but, looking to bounce back, looking to really just hone in on some spots here that I like and just go a little harder on those and not spread my units too thinly across the card. But, without further ado, let's get right into the breakdowns here. We have a pretty loaded card, so let's get right into it. And in the next fight, we have Dennis Bondar versus Malcolm Gordon, and Bondar is the minus 240 favorite. Come back on Gordon is plus 200, and we'll start with Dennis first. So, he's primarily a grappler. On the feet, he's kind of wild there. He looks to just kind of back opponents down, just swing big looping hooks. Really, I guess just look to close the distance and eventually get his hands on his opponent where, he's been pretty consistent in doing so. He is someone who will pretty aggressively go to the wrestling, go to the grappling on top. He's got pretty solid control, very nice ground and pound, and will look for the submissions if possible. Overall, his cardio, I guess seems solid. It's hard to say because he does have a lot of early finishes, but he's also had fights get extended late in the second and third round, and he's been able to get finishes in those fights as well. And, on top of that, he does push a pretty grappling heavy pace as well. So I think all things considered, his cardio is solid, despite some of the red flags that might pop up here. But overall, I do think he's a pretty solid grappler with, good amount of finishing upside when the fight hits the ground. The level of competition is not great, but, he's going up against Malcolm Gordon, who is not really a good fighter himself and has not really faced the best competition as well. But as far as what Gordon brings to the table, he's got decent power in his hands. Supposedly he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but I don't think he's really quite shown it. But the big thing with Gordon, I feel, is the fact that he's kind of chinny and, he does put himself in pretty compromising positions a lot of the time, with the grappling or even just him getting caught, right? On the regionals, he's very careless when he's on the ground, and he does get caught pretty frequently. A lot of the fights I've seen him in, he gets clipped early and he gets rocked, but is somehow able to squeeze these wins out of his ass. So, he's been able to do it against some of these lower-level guys, but we have seen that once he gets that step up in competition, once he's in the UFC, it's not really happening anymore. He wasn't able to do much against Albazi, gave up a dominant position early and then got submitted and then got starched early against Madarji, who, you can say these guys are solid prospects, but I think they kind of just exposed some of the big flaws in Gordon's game that some of these lower level guys weren't able to, right? So overall, I'm just not really sold on Gordon as a fighter. I really think that, he's kind of gotten away with some of these wins, because, if you watch some of his fights, he's put in a lot of trouble, put in very compromising situations, but has been able to really just weasel his way out of it. But, I don't know if it's going to be happening here. Bondar, I think, is a pretty solid prospect. I think there's a very clear path to victory in the wrestling and the grappling for him. And then I think that on the feet, while Bondar's not a particularly high-level striker, he could still clip Gordon, because Gordon's chin is it's completely gone, I think. He's been finished 4 or 5 times in all of his losses, 4 via knockout, and then 1 via submission. And then in a lot of the fights he's winning, he's also getting clipped and hurt as well. So I think Bondar could potentially clip Gordon and get the knockout. But I think more realistically, we see Bondar go to the wrestling, get a good amount of top control time on Gordon, potentially get the ground and pound finish. But I think he could find the submission as well. I think the cardio of Bondar is a bit better as well. I think he could push a pretty crazy pace with his wrestling, whereas with Gordon, we saw him slow down even against Figueiredo, who's got pretty shitty cardio himself. So I got to go with Bondar. I think he's got Gordon covered pretty much everywhere. Gordon has shown some power on the feet, so maybe he could clip Bondar, but I don't think he's got much to offer off his back against Gordon here. So I think Bondar takes this. I think he wins either. Honestly, I think he can win however he wants, man. He could either knock him out, submit him, potentially just grind him out for a decision as well. So I like Bondar here a lot. I think this is a full fade on Gordon. I don't think Gordon is UFC caliber, so I'm going to go with Bondar here. Going to look to parlay him as well. I think he takes this pretty decisively. So Bondar's the pick, and I'll just take him to win inside the distance. And in the next fight, we have Danilo Marquez versus Jailton Almeida. And Almeida's the minus 425 favorite. Come back on Marquez is plus 325. And, we'll start with Almeida first. And I'll just preface this by saying there's very limited footage on this guy. I think the only fight I was able to find from him was the Contender Series fight. I wasn't able to find some of his other regional fights as well, but from the looks of things, he does look like a very strong submission grappler. He's very explosive with his takedowns. He's a very strong, powerful guy in there. It does look like he's maybe able to use his strength advantage a lot in these fights, being able to just power his way into these takedowns and submissions, because, he was kind of brute forcing a lot of his stuff in the Contender Series, and it does look like he's got a lot of early finishes on the regionals as well. So some red flags here on the Almeida side. Lots of finishes, very limited tape, so it's hard to get a great read on the guy. But by all accounts, he does seem like a pretty strong, physical grappler in there. And he's going up against a Marquez who, not exactly the most extensive resume either, and not a ton of footage also, but he does have a few more UFC fights. That said, though, he does come off as someone who is a strong submission grappler also. Striking's not particularly great for Marquez. He's a bit stiff there, but in all of his fights, he is able to get the fight into control positions, look to get his grappling going. So, he's reliable in that sense, but, I don't think he's going to be winning too many fights on the feet. Overall, though, I don't know if there's too much else to say about this fight, mainly because there's just so limited footage on Almeida. It's just hard to get a great read on him. But from what I have seen, it looks like Almeida's just a younger, stronger version of Marquez, two grappling heavy guys. But, I favor the athleticism of Almeida much more. So I can kind of see why he's such a big favorite. Marquez hasn't really looked phenomenal in any of his fights. His cardio doesn't seem great as well. So overall, just a really weird fight to get a read on, honestly. I can kind of understand why Almeida's this big of a favorite. They have a lot of the same strengths, but, Almeida, I think, he's got more fights, a little more experience. He's probably the better athlete, the stronger guy in there. And, I think that's going to play a factor in a lot of the grappling exchanges. But, I don't really know if you really want to lay the minus 400 on a guy where, we don't have too much information on. But on the other hand, I just don't see too many paths to victory for Marquez, outside of maybe Almeida gassing himself out early, not finding the submission, and then, Marquez being able to sink something in late in the fight if Almeida slows down. But, I don't know if I want to bank on that happening. This is just kind of a stay away fight for me, honestly. A lot of question marks around both guys, but if you had to really press me for a side, I got to go with the much younger, more physical grappler in Almeida. But yeah, price tag's not really enticing, honestly. And moving along, we have Alexis Davis versus Julia Soliarenko, and Davis is the minus 220 favorite. Comeback on Soliarenko is plus 185. And we'll start with Soliarenko first. So, pretty low level fighter, honestly. On the feet, she does swing pretty wild. Lots of wild overhands. I think it was in the Rosa fight where she just came out with like a Superman punch. So, she's a little chaotic on the feet, and her grappling is a little one-dimensional as well. She really just likes to go for that armbar. I have seen her look to pull guard as well. So, overall, I find her game a little unpolished, and it does look like she's been able to kind of just bully lower level opponents on the regionals, been getting away with that armbar submission. But it does look like when she's taken that step up, she's been struggling a little bit. That said, though, she didn't look too bad in her most recent fight against Julia Avila. It was actually somewhat competitive up until that third round submission. But, looking back at it, I think that Avila might not be as great of a prospect as, we make her out to be, which I'll probably get into later when we, eventually break her down some of her fights. But yeah, that was a decent performance by Soliarenko. Looks like, she's improving her game a little bit, but overall, I still think she's a bit unpolished. And she's going to be going up against Davis, who is a very crafty, wily vet. She's honestly, she's getting a bit slower now, but, she is someone who could do a little bit of everything. The athleticism is, taking a bit of a hit, but she does have a pretty well-rounded skill set. If you look through some of, her most recent fights, or even some of the fights she's been in, she's been in there with some solid fighters like Araujo, Chukagi, and Maya, girls who are ranked, and, she was able to keep it pretty competitive in there. Some of those fights that she arguably could have won, but overall, I don't think Davis is a terrible fighter. She's very well-rounded, and she does fight pretty competitively with some of the better fighters in the division. And, we were able to see her, use that vet savvy against the likes of, Mazo. Went to her grappling there and, took advantage of a very green fighter in Sabina Mazo. And then, she's coming off of a loss against Khamzat in a fight that was, pretty competitive as well. So, I do think Davis is a pretty solid fighter, a solid veteran. Soliarenko's not that good of a fighter. So, pure pick-wise, I got to go with Davis here. She's got a ton more experience, and, she does fight pretty well, against some of these high-level fighters. That said, though, she is on a bit of a decline. She's slowing down. And, Soliarenko is someone who, despite being a bit of a punching bag on the feet, will move forward, and she does stay pretty active with her, output and volume. And like I said before, Davis does fight close, so that's a good thing when she's a big dog, but that's pretty bad when she's a decent sized favorite like this. So if this fight happens on the feet, it's probably going to be a pretty back and forth affair. I think for Davis to win this soundly, she's going to have to go to her wrestling, or Soliarenko is going to have to pull guard and end up on her back for extended periods for this fight to make Davis look like a solid favorite. So probably not going to touch this from a betting perspective. Don't really recommend laying the juice on someone like Davis, who does fight relatively close. If anything, I think Soliarenko might be the value side. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I just think that for Davis to win, she's going to have to go to the wrestling, which she hasn't really shown to do aggressively yet. She's more of like an opportunistic sort of wrestler. So, if she catches a kick or something, she'll take it to the grappling department. But otherwise, she's not someone that will really pursue the wrestling or the grappling. So pure pick-wise, I'm going to go with Davis here. I do think the fight might play out pretty close if it is 100% on the feet. But even then, I think Davis should be able to out-veteran Soliarenko here and maybe win a very close, like 29-28 decision. So official pick for me in this fight is Davis, but don't really recommend betting her at like minus 220. All right, moving along, we have Jason Witt versus Philip Rowe, and Rowe's the minus 160 favorite. Comeback on Witt is plus 140. So, we'll start with Witt, who has just been on my fade list. The guy I don't think is that good, but, he does bring a decent skill set to the table here. He is a pretty consistent wrestler. He will generally look to get the fight to the ground, look to maintain control positions, and kind of just grind out the fight. But, the big issues I do have with him is that, one, he's kind of chinny. He's been hurt and rocked multiple occasions. He's been knocked out before. I don't think his cardio is that great either. He was able to get out a lot of his fights, but I think those were pretty favorable matchups as well, which, I'll get into shortly, but I don't think he's got the cardio to sustain a very grappling intensive fight. And in the fights that he has been able to do that, it's been against other old aging fighters. I brought this up before in a previous podcast that I did a breakdown for Witt for, but you go through some of the opponents he's fought on the regionals. They're all guys who are way past their prime, guys who are in their mid 30s, some even in their 40s. So I think the guy's gotten some pretty favorable matchups, which has allowed him to really implement his wrestling grappling game plan. And it's kind of led to his cardio looking a bit better than it really is, honestly. Even in the Barberena fight, which, he was having some success early, but he was slowing down pretty significantly that fight. Barberena was starting to really pour it on Witt, and Witt was, he was kind of just hanging on by a thread late in that fight. So really, I really am not high on Witt at all. I will admit, he brings a decent skill set to the table, and he is consistent with the wrestling, but, overall, I don't think he's a great fighter. And, I've been looking to fade him, but I don't know if Philip Rowe is going to be the guy, especially at minus 160. Rowe, he's got some power on the feet, which, you do have to be wary of, especially, since Witt, he's been finished on numerous occasions and he's been hurt. So that's a concern there. But Rowe, by and large, is not a very high volume striker. He's a bit more of a counterpuncher. His takedown defense also isn't particularly great. He is someone who, he does an okay job of working his way back up, but sometimes he will just kind of hunt for submissions. But, I actually don't think the defensive grappling of Rowe is that bad. In fact, I think he's actually got a number of wins where, he's actually a bit behind, but he's able to kind of mount a bit of a comeback. He's able to kind of make his opponents work, and then he's able to find the submission. So I think Rowe might actually be live for a submission here, if Witt's starting to slow down and we see Rowe really make Witt work, because I really don't think Witt's got the best cardio, and of course I do think that Rowe could potentially just find the chin of Witt early, because Witt's not super quick in there. His entries are a bit telegraphed, and if Rowe can line one up, he could potentially catch Witt. So I think Rowe's got a number of opportunities to find the finish here, but with the way Rowe fights, sometimes he could give up a decent amount of control time, and we could very well see Witt just kind of grind out a very sloppy sort of decision. But official pick, I'm still going to go with Rowe here. I'm still not sold on Witt, man. I know you can make a lot of compelling arguments for taking Witt as the dog. He's a very consistent grappler, and he can definitely hit takedowns and get control time, but I really just cannot bring myself to taking Witt here. If I bet him, he's probably going to get starched or he's going to get submitted here. So I think I'm just going to stay away from this fight. It's just not worth it for me at this point. But I really can't hate anyone if they want to take a shot on Witt or Witt via decision. There is a path to victory, but I can't really trust Witt here. So I'm going to go with Rowe to get it done. Round 3 submission. And moving along, we have Chidi Kuani versus Marc-Andre Barriault. And Barriault is going to be the minus 135 favorite. Come back on Kuani is plus 115. And we'll start with the guy making his UFC debut in Kuani. So he does look like a pretty solid regional vet, honestly. He's a bit of a journeyman, if I'm being straight here. He's fought at Bellator, some other promotions. He's got some okay wins, but it does look like when he gets that step up in competition, he does seem to fall short. And I don't think he's a terrible fighter by any means, but, he just hasn't seemed to really put it all together. He's got a really tall frame. He's really tall and lanky in there, does a decent job fighting at distance, but, I think where he does his best work is probably in the clinch. He's got some very nasty knees there. And overall, Kuani has got some nice attritional work, very heavy body kicks. And, the guy, he does slow down a bit in fights, but he does push a pretty decent pace. But it does look like where he struggled the most is when his opponents are able to really implement the wrestling and the grappling. And, that's where we see him slow down like a lot. And, his takedown defense and his bottom game doesn't look particularly great either. But fortunately for him, he's going up against Bereau, who is mainly a boxer as well. Hasn't really shown much wrestling or grappling. And I do feel Bereau's a bit of a journeyman also, not to be mean or anything, but it does look like when he takes a step up in competition, he does struggle a bit also. But with Bereau, he is a pretty straightforward fighter. He will look to pressure his opponents, move forward, and throw volume. His output is solid. His cardio is okay. Maybe not as good as, I thought it was going into the tape, because, we see him, finish guys late, like that one dude in the third round, blanking on his name. And then he did put on a pretty decent performance against Lungambula in his most recent fight. But, we do have to remember he was getting outpaced by guys like Jocko and Sanchez, who don't have the best cardio to begin with. So I don't think the cardio of Bereau is, as good as, some people might think it is. But taking a look at this matchup, I do feel it's a pretty close competitive fight. Like I was saying before, I think both of these guys are at around similar level. They struggle a bit when they're taking a step up, but they're beating guys who are, they're beating I think pretty high level regional guys. But going into this matchup, I do feel that Njokwani's got the tools to win. He's got some very nasty knees to the body and legs and kicks to the body. So I do feel that's going to do a good job of slowing down Bereau, because, Bereau, he does start to pick it up later in fights. He's got a habit of, dropping the first round as well. So I think we see Njokwani start a bit stronger. We see him take the first round. The second round's going to get interesting, because that's when Bereau starts to pick it up a bit. So we can see Bereau start to, close out that second round, which, I do think kind of favors him, because, the refs or the judges probably do favor the guy who finished the round a little stronger. But then I can definitely see the attritional work of Njokwani start to take its toll on Bereau, and we don't see him pick it up as hard going into the latter part of the second and even the third round. That said, though, I do think that Njokwani does slow down a bit, and we see Bereau start to pick it up as the fight progresses. But ultimately, I think I'm still going to go with Njokwani here, because, I do think he wins that first round. The second round's going to be close, but I do think he should edge it. I like the length and the reach that Njokwani brings into this fight. I also like the footwork and the movement of Njokwani. I think he's got a decent chance of kind of staying on the outside and just picking at Bereau. And then, if Bereau does close the distance, I do like the clinch work of Njokwani. So official pick, I am going to side with Njokwani here, but this is going to be a pretty close fight. Both guys have historically struggled with guys who could wrestle and grapple a bit, so they're going to be giving each other the fight they want. And it's going to be, I think, pretty 50-50 back and forth sort of fight. So, not like crazy confident about it, but I do feel it's going to be a close fight. And, I will say this about Marc-Andre Bereau is he has looked much better in his most recent fights physically. Before I felt like he's kind of been a bit flabby, but his most recent fight, he looked like he was in pretty tip-top shape. Either that or it was the tan, because the guy looked much more shredded up in this fight. But, that is a bit of a factor here in Njokwani, or Bereau is going to be a bit younger, and he's going to be he's going to be in his prime, whereas Njokwani is starting to age out a little bit. Not that he's getting old, but I do favor the youth of Bereau a little bit more, but not by a significant margin. So, gun to my head, I'm going to go with Njokwani here, but like I've been saying, it's going to be a pretty close fight.
And moving along, we have Hakeem Dawodu versus Michael Trizano, and Dawodu's the minus 190 favorite. Come back on. Trizano is plus 165. So this should be a pretty fun matchup between two young strikers, two guys who I think do have a bit of potential in the division. But we'll start with Trizano first. Trizano, like I said, primarily a striker, really solid there. He's got solid fundamentals. He's got a great jab, very good movement on the feet. Very defensively sound as well. The only criticism I guess I really have for him in terms of the striking is the output. He's not someone who will throw a lot, but he is someone who is pretty efficient. He throws or he lands a lot of what he throws, but the issue is just sometimes it's the output. And he has struggled a bit with grapplers before. But, it's not going to be too big of an issue here because Dawodu is primarily a striker as well. Haven't seen him look to wrestle or grapple too much. But on the other side of things, Dawodu is a pretty solid striker as well. And he does struggle with the same issues, I think, in terms of the output. The numbers are a bit inflated if you look at his stats because Dawodu, he is a pretty good kicker. He's really consistent with it. But, by and large, when it comes to the hands, I'd say he's on par with Trizano in terms of the output. Both guys are guys who tend to just throw out one or two strikes. They're not going to put together like crazy combinations or something. So I do feel overall it's going to be pretty close on the feet. But I think I might just favor Dawodu a little more, in terms of, him having maybe a little more power. His shots might be a little more effective. And Dawodu actually does a pretty good job of filling in his striking with the kicks. So for those reasons, I definitely am going to edge Dawodu a little bit more. But I do feel overall it's a very close fight. I really don't think Dawodu should be this big of a favorite, though. I think he should be like a slight to moderate favorite. He's getting close to, minus 200 here, so it is getting a little out of hand, especially since I do think this fight is probably going to go to a decision. And, Dawodu is someone who historically has been someone who fights pretty close. He's got a ton of split decisions. And, same with Trizano, honestly. So, this is going to be, I think, a pretty close fight for that reason, pretty back and forth on the feet. But I do edge it towards Dawodu. He's probably going to do a little more with the kicks. And I do think the kicks are going to be pretty effective against someone like Trizano, who is someone that is kind of heavy on that lead leg. So the pick for me is going to be Dawodu, but, I might take a small shot on Trizano if the line continues to get steamed. I don't think Dawodu should be this big of a favorite. I actually kind of like the fight goes the distance as well. Both guys have shown that, they fight pretty close on the feet. They're probably similar level of striker. Neither guy's really like a fantastic finisher or anything, and both guys, are pretty defensively sound in there. So I really do like the over. Kind of hoping it's not crazy juiced or anything, but I do think this fight tends to go towards a decision. But overall, I'm going to side with Dawodu here, but I do feel overall the line is a little wide.
And in the next fight, we have Miles Johns versus John Castaneda. And Johns is the minus 235 favorite. Comeback on Castaneda is plus 203. And we'll start with Castaneda, the underdog. So, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, a solid, I think, regional level fighter. Overall, he's primarily a striker, but he can mix in some of the wrestling and the grappling. But by and large, a lot of his fights do play out on the feet. He's got solid output, solid work rate. The cardio and the output really seem to check out. His durability seems fine as well. Just overall, I think he's a solid fighter, just not really a great fighter. I don't think he really excels anywhere, to be honest. He's kind of just reliant on being able to consistently throw out output and, move forward and, just throw volume, basically. And I guess the reason that I don't think he's a particularly, great fighter is just because we see him struggle a bit when he does take that step up in competition. He's done well enough on the regionals. He's beaten some decent guys, but he has dropped the ball on a few occasions on the regionals as well, right? A split decision loss to Alde. And even in the Marcelo Rojo fight, it was a pretty close fight up until that finish. And I really don't rate Rojo all that highly. Honestly, I don't rate the Latin American regional scene all that highly as well. So, solid fighter on Castaneda's end, but at the end of the day, I just don't think he's, quite at that level. I'd say he's a solid top-level regional guy, maybe barely UFC caliber, but regardless, he's going to be going up against Johns, who I think's got a little more potential. He's primarily a wrestler, but, he's kind of fallen in love with his hands a little bit. And, you can't really blame the guy because, he's getting knockouts. He's got some power, and his boxing's really coming along. So it's good. His game is starting to develop a bit, really round out his game because the guy's got really good wrestling, very, very powerful, very explosive wrestler. The top control's not particularly great, but, he has shown he could hit, 6-7 takedowns in a fight. And I think the cardio is actually okay. A lot of people probably think he's got bad cardio. He does slow down in the third round, but you do have to realize he's hitting a lot of takedowns. These fights, they're pretty high paced wrestling fights, so that's something you got to take into consideration. Is the pace of the fight, because it's not just him that's slowing down. His opponents are slowing down significantly in those fights as well. So it's not like he's just completely gassed after the first round and a half and is on survival mode. He's still hitting takedowns, and his opponents are slowing down quite a bit as well. So that's something you got to take into consideration. So while I don't think Johns has got super high level cardio, I do think it's serviceable to the point where he could implement a pretty solid wrestling heavy game plan without completely dying in there. That said, though, it is still going to be a bit of a concern, but I would not classify Johns as like a terrible gasser or anything. But, taking a look at this matchup, I do feel Johns is maybe a little better everywhere. I could favor the striking of Castaneda a little more. I really don't think the boxing of Johns is, particularly great. I think what makes it really effective is the fact that, one, he's got power, and two, you got to worry about the takedown. So it meshes really well with his boxing style, but overall, I don't think he's like a super high level, super technical boxer in there. But it is effective because of his wrestling and his power. So I do think that on the feet, it could be pretty close for those reasons. And I do think that Johns might have the knockout upside, but Castaneda's shown a fantastic chin so far. And so I think he should be able to hang with Johns on the feet and potentially even get the better of Johns. But I think what really will be the equalizer for Johns in this fight is going to be the wrestling. I think that if the fight does get a bit out of hand, we could see him start to hit some takedowns and look to just score points that way, because we have seen Johns hit multiple takedowns in fights. But where it does get a little dicey is when it gets extended, later in the fight, possibly in the third round. We've seen Johns look, pretty tired in that third round. And Castaneda does have pretty solid cardio, but I don't think I've seen Castaneda pushed in terms of his grappling and wrestling cardio. He does seem to have solid striking cardio, but regardless, I do think that third round could get a little dicey for Johns. But I think he should be able to gut it out. He was able to hit some pretty timely takedowns in a lot of his fights that do get extended. So I got to go with Johns here, but the price does seem a little steep, especially since the margin for victory for Johns, I think, is not super wide, because I think it's going to come down to him being able to hit takedowns early in the fight to really secure those rounds, and he's going to have enough in the tank to survive that last round as well. But I do think he gets it done, but I don't know about that minus 250 price tag, though. Moving along, we have Julian Rosa versus Steven Peterson, and Rosa's the minus 285 favorite. Come back on Peterson is plus 245. Pretty interesting matchup. Should be a fun one. Rosa generally is in pretty fun matchups, but we'll start with Peterson first, the underdog. He's a decent fighter, honestly. He's pretty well-rounded, kind of a jack-of-all-trades sort of fighter. Can do a little bit of everything. Generally does prefer to keep the fight standing, though. He's got decent striking, but has shown he can mix in the wrestling and the grappling a bit. His takedown defense is okay, I guess. It's nothing fantastic. He's got decent defensive grappling also, never been submitted. The cardio and the output is solid also. The guy has fought 3 hard rounds before, so the cardio does check out. Durability checks out as well. So all in all, I think Peterson is a pretty solid, mid-level fighter. Yeah, he's nothing special, right? Because he does fall short when he does take that step up in competition, but he will beat guys who probably aren't UFC caliber. So all in all, I would consider him, I guess, a decent gatekeeper, right? I'd probably like just UFC caliber gatekeeper sort of guy. And on the other hand, he's going to be up against Julian Rosa, who I think is in a similar situation. Rosa, I think, is a bit of a gatekeeper as well, but I do think he's maybe a notch up, because I think the guys that Rosa's fighting and beating are, I'd say, a bit better than some of the guys that Peterson's beating. And conversely, I think the guys Rosa's losing to is also a bit better than some of the guys that Peterson's losing to. So as far as the levels go, I do think Rosa's a little bit better, but as far as what Rosa brings to the table, he's a very solid offensive striker. He's quite good actually, but the issue that I have with Rosa is it's going to be the chin. He's got a super fragile chin. The guy gets rocked. He gets knocked out pretty frequently, and he just kind of invites that sort of fight, right? He's someone who's very aggressive, likes to push a pace, likes to back opponents down, and just get really wild in terms of just the brawls and stuff. So Rosa, very exciting, very fun fighter to watch, but he does leave his chin on a platter, and he's just not very durable. So, he's a very dangerous fighter to bet on, especially as a big favorite here. But the flip side of things is that I really don't think Peterson's like a phenomenal striker. And I don't think that Peterson is a very heavy hitter either. So, we look at the guys that have been able to knock Rosa out. They're very, very sharp strikers, guys with a lot of power, who have a lot of finishing upside, and guys who have been traditionally finishers. So, guys like Sung Woo Choi, very sharp striker, very, very, he's got good power, a lot of finishes on his record. Arce, another good boxer, and that was actually a close fight up until a head kick, which, head kick's going to put most people out anyways. And then Devontae Smith, another guy with a lot of power, very, very sharp, precise striking. So, yeah, these guys that are knocking Rosa out are, they're a different type of fighter than Peterson, basically. So I really do feel this is a pretty favorable matchup for Rosa here. Rosa's got decent takedown defense. He's got solid cardio, decent get-ups. So I do think this fight largely plays out on the feet, in which case I do favor Rosa pretty significantly. Rosa does have a habit of making fights a little closer than they should be, but, Rosa is able to push a pretty crazy pace. And, outside of him getting clipped, I do think he should win the striking exchanges pretty dominantly. Rosa is actually, I think, a really strong offensive striker, brings a phenomenal pace. And I do think that he could potentially even hurt Peterson. Rosa's a somewhat heavy hitter, actually. I think most of his wins are via finish. So, Rosa, very solid offensive striker with good attritional damage. So I really like Rosa in this spot. I do think he's a pretty big favorite for a reason. I think it's actually justified. I just don't see too many paths to victory for Peterson here. He's given up a decent amount of size. I favor the striking of Rosa a bit more. Rosa can wrestle a bit as well. So I think Rosa is just a little better everywhere outside of the chin. And, as far as like level of competition goes, I do favor Rosa a bit more as well. So, while both guys I think are kind of journeyman gatekeeper, I do think there are still levels to this when it comes to the gatekeeping, and I do think Rosa is just a step above Peterson. So I'm going to go with Rosa here. I think he wins a pretty dominant decision. I could see Rosa getting the finish as well. He's a pretty potent finisher, so I think Rosa gets it done here in somewhat dominant fashion. So yeah, give me Rosa.
And in the next fight, we have Tresean Gore versus Brian Battle, and Gore's going to be the minus 135 favorite. Come back on. Battle is plus 115, and this fight was initially scheduled to take place on the tough season finale card, but Gore wasn't able to make it. Had like a knee injury or something, but now he's back and looking to make his UFC debut. And not a ton of tape on Gore. The guy's only had 3 professional fights, 5 if you want to count the ones on The Ultimate Fighter. But from what I have seen, he is a very big, strong guy in there. Very calm and composed with the striking, which, is kind of good to see for someone who doesn't have that many fights. He's a big power guy, but he's not in there looking to just bum rush opponents, just throw big power shots with everything that he throws. And, he's not going to gas himself out. At least not, from what we've seen so far. But, he does have a nice jab, a very solid kicking game. But, he can actually be a little low volume because, he's not out there throwing too much. He's just in there. He's taking his time, picking his shots, which, is good. But, it also leads to him being a little lower output. That said, though, he does hit pretty hard. So, any shot that he lands, it's going to be pretty impactful when it comes to, just damaging his opponents and the optics. So, really like that about Gore. And then, he has shown he could wrestle offensively a bit as well. He's shown a bit of a top game. Haven't really seen him, on the bottom or his takedown defense tested too much. So can't really speak about that. But, he does look like a somewhat well-rounded fighter offensively, despite being a little green. His opponent, Battle, I'd say, is in a similar situation. I don't think he's as heavy of a hitter as Gore. And on the feet, I don't think Battle's hands are as good or as sharp, but he is a very aggressive fighter. He's got a solid kicking game, and he could also mix in the wrestling and the grappling as well. But where I think I might give Battle the advantage is probably going to be in the cardio. I mean, Battle is just an absolute dog in there, constantly moving forward, constantly working, and he does push a pretty strong pace in there. So Striking, I favor Gore. Power, I favor Gore. But the cardio and I guess the tenacity, I favor Battle a little bit more. He's very tough. He's a junkyard dog in there. So you gotta like that about someone. Who's not afraid to get a little dirty in there. So this is a very interesting fight. But overall, I think I do favor Gore a bit more. I actually kind of like Gore a decent amount in this fight. Overall, I just think he's the better athlete. I think he's going to be the much more effective striker in there. He's going to be landing some pretty hard shots on Battle, and I think that's going to do a decent job of kind of stifling the aggression of Battle a little bit. Once you have a big guy, just throwing heavy leg kicks at you, throwing really big, powerful shots at you, it does make guys, tend to shy away a little more, not look to engage as hard or be a little more tentative. So for that reason, I do favor Gore here. And, I thought when they first got matched up that Gore was a pretty decent-sized favorite, but I think now that the lines have opened up again, they've made Gore not as big of a favorite, which, is interesting. Gore is coming off of a knee injury, so you do have to wonder how he's going to look. But, he's a very young guy, so the recovery time is probably not going to be too bad. And, from what I have seen, he does look to be in pretty good shape still. So I do like Gore here quite a bit. I think that if he could hit some takedowns as well, that would definitely be good for him. He's a very big, strong guy on top of the fact, he does throw pretty heavy as well. So I think Gore is maybe just a little bit better in most aspects, except for maybe the cardio. So I like Gore here. I think he should get it done, either by knockout or decision. Battle was getting clipped by someone like Urbina, who, not a great fighter. And, he was doing some damage to Battle. So I do think that Gore should be able to land some pretty heavy shots on Battle. Battle has shown good durability, so I wouldn't be surprised if he made it, to the cards. But I do think Gore is going to do a good amount of damage on Battle. So I'm going to take Gore to win. I'm just going to take him to win via round 2 knockout. I think he's just going to be doing too much damage to Battle, and we see a pretty nasty knockout come the second round. But moving along, we have Phil Hawes versus Sam Alvey, and Hawes is the -350 favorite. Comeback on Alvey is +285, and I am a little surprised Alvey's still with the promotion at this point. He's 0-6-1 of his last 7, so I wouldn't be surprised if they had a deal where they don't have to pay him unless he wins. But regardless, he's going to be going up against Phil Hawes, and it's going to be a tough fight for him because Alvey honestly has not looked great. Obviously, I mean he is 0-6-1. He did look okay in the Dow and Jung fight, but outside of that, he does not look good at all. He's been just very low volume in there, just constantly getting backed up against the cage. Just not really throwing, looking super hesitant. Before his most recent loss to Turman, he got, cracked pretty hard, eventually got choked out against Marquez. So, I do think that Alvey, he's not really liking taking damage at this point. So he's just kind of been backing up, playing it a bit safe. And, overall, he's a pretty limited fighter to begin with. So, at this stage in his career, 35, going up against, some pretty heavy hitters, guys much younger than him. I really don't know how much Alvey's got left to offer here. And he's going to get matched up with Phil Hawes, who, very solid, well-rounded fighter, big power on the feet. His boxing is coming along quite well. And of course, Phil Hawes, he can wrestle as well. Very explosive there. The only thing with Hawes, though, is the chin's just completely gone. We saw him just piecing up Curtis early in that fight and then just gets bopped on the nose by a shot that didn't even look like it landed that hard, and he just completely crumples over. So I feel like the chin has always been a little suspect for Hawes, but that fight really showed it. And then on top of that, Hawes just doesn't have the best cardio either. He's usually just huffing and puffing by the time that second and third round rolls around. But I don't know if that's going to be like a super big issue here. Alvey hasn't shown phenomenal power, and Alvey's cardio is not exactly great either. So this is a somewhat favorable matchup for Hawes, but, Hawes definitely does have a ton of red flags to be wary of, especially at, a -350. So I would caution taking Hawes here, but, I do think this is a pretty favorable fight for him. I think Hawes should be somewhat safe on the feet. Of course he can get clipped, but, Alvey showed in his last fight against Turman, he just doesn't really have it anymore. And Turman is someone who I don't really rate highly in terms of his striking and his chin either. So I do think Hawes might be a little step up in both departments. And, if Turman was able to have that sort of success against Alvey, I think that
Hawes should be able to as well. And of course, I do think that Hawes can go to the wrestling as well. I'm not sure if he wants to go to it too aggressively because Alvey does have, pretty decent takedown defense. And Hawes does have pretty suspect cardio, so the last thing you want to do is gas yourself out and then get clipped late in the fight. So overall, I do like Hawes in this fight. I think he's got a number of paths to victory. But, man, there's just way too many red flags around Hawes at this point. The cardio, the durability. Even though he is up against someone like Alvey who, pretty significant decline at this point, I just am not really comfortable laying the minus 350 on Hawes. He's just kind of unreliable at this point. But I'll still pick him to win. I think he'll win a pretty sound decision here. If he's not taking too many risks, he can probably just look to stay safe, work the boxing, and, maybe mix in the wrestling to kind of seal off rounds. So I'm going to go with Hawes. I think he wins via decision, but probably won't bet this fight.
And in the next fight, we have Carlston Harris versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. And Rakhmonov's the minus 225 favorite. Comeback on Harris is plus 190. And this should be one of the more exciting fights on the card. Two very dynamic finishers going at it. Two prospects, I guess. I mean, Harris is a little old to be a prospect, but Rakhmonov, I think, definitely fits the bill. And honestly, I think both guys have pretty similar attributes in terms of what they bring to the table. Both guys are very heavy hitters on the feet. Harris, I think, is a little more wild on the feet. His striking does come off as a little wonky, but it's effective. He's definitely can crack on the feet. He's hurting guys on the regionals. He's hurting guys at the UFC level. Both guys are really strong submission grapplers. I do think Harris is going to be the more dangerous submission grappler, but Rakhmonov, he's definitely dangerous there as well. But I do think that Harris is the more well-versed grappler, whereas Rakhmonov, I think he's a little more opportunistic with his submissions. But overall, I do think both guys are pretty slick on the ground. Both guys can finish on the feet. So, this is, I think, a pretty well-matched fight for both guys. Both guys are, pretty similar in UFC and regional experience. I do favor the UFC experience of Rakhmonov just slightly. Him putting away two solid vets in Oliveira and Pereira, I think a little more impressive than Harris putting away Castaneda and Aguilera, but not by a crazy margin, because Oliveira is someone who's kind of been known to look for a way out when fights don't really go his way. That said, the Oliveira is still a very solid win, and then this Pereira's fight was a little weird, man. Pereira's is kind of undersized for the division, and he was coming off of a pretty long layoff on top of just being a bit old for the division also. But regardless, still really solid wins. So both guys showing that they're still really dangerous even at the UFC level. But I guess the big difference between the two is really just going to be the age. Rakhmonov's got I think like a 7 or 8 year youth advantage over Harris. But taking a look at this matchup, I think that on the feet, I definitely do favor Rakhmonov a little more. He's definitely a little tighter, a little sharper with the striking, whereas Harris, he does get a little wild in there, does swing, big looping shots. He's been able to catch and clip guys like Castaneda in there, but Castaneda looking like his chin might be a little shaky right now, but it's hard to say. He's still pretty early in his career. But overall, I do feel that Rakhmonov is the much tighter striker. If this does hit the ground, though, I would favor Carlston a bit, maybe early in the fight, but as it gets extended, I'm not sure how the cardio of Harris is going to hold up. I haven't really seen him extended too much, just a few times on the regionals, but he did a good job pacing those fights. It did look like he was slowing down, but by and large, Harris is a finisher. So, someone as explosive as he is, at this age, the cardio is starting to be a bit of a concern. So, if the fight does get extended, I definitely favor Rakhmonov. Overall, I think I'm going to go with Rakhmonov in this one. I'm going to favor the much younger fighter, the guy that, should be able to defend the submission attempts of Harris and hopefully, keep it, stay safe on the feet and avoid the big power shots of Harris. That's going to be tough, but I do think he should be able to get it done. Rakhmonov hasn't really shown any durability issues or, really suspect defensive grappling. So I'm going to go with Rakhmonov here. I think he might be able to get it done inside the distance, especially with how aggressive Harris is usually. So, if Harris doesn't get Rakhmonov out of there, I could see him potentially using up too much of that cardio, and we see Rakhmonov start to pick it up, as the fight gets prolonged a little bit. So I'm going to go with Rakhmonov. I think he gets it done either round 2, round 3 submission. Betting wise, I don't know if I really want to touch this. Rakhmonov I think is a solid prospect, but right now I'm not too sure if I really want to jump in front of Harris. The guy is still very dangerous, and he has shown a proclivity to put away some of these prospects. So, I like Rakhmonov to win here, but minus 250 is, I think, a little too steep, especially up against someone like Harris, who is a really dangerous opponent. Regardless, though, I'm still going to pick Rakhmonov to win, but, it's probably going to be a bit of a sweat for him in this fight.
Moving along, we have Punahele Soriano versus Nick Maximov, and Soriano's the minus 200 favorite. Come back on Maximov is plus 170, and we'll start with Maximov first. Not a ton of footage on the guy, but I feel like we do have a good understanding of what his game's like. He's mainly a wrestler, but he does seem a little green in there still. That said, though, he is pretty consistent with going to the wrestling. He doesn't look to strike too much. His striking's not that good, but again, he's consistent with hitting the takedowns and getting the fight to where his strengths are. So overall, I would say he's a pretty reliable wrestler, and he is reliable to just spam takedowns and get the fight into the grappling realm. And he's going to be going up against Soriano, who has got a wrestling background as well, but it does look like Soriano's kind of fallen in love with his hands. And, you can't really blame him because he's got a lot of power there. He's got a lot of knockouts. And if that's the case, you can't really blame the guy, for wanting to keep it standing and look to get his opponents out of there early. But, I will say this about Soriano. His cardio is not great. He hasn't really shown that he could pace himself all that well either. So, past that first round, he's gonna slow down pretty significantly. We saw that happen in the Brendan Allen fight. We saw that happen a bit in the Pickett fight, but luckily for him, he was going up against Pickett, who is a pretty low volume fighter who doesn't really push up pace either. So we saw Soriano just be able to outpace Pickett even after just chucking bombs after that first round. But taking a look at this matchup, I think it's kind of a tough fight to call just because Soriano, I think, is the better fighter on paper. Obviously he's got the knockout potential early, but on the other hand, we haven't really seen the chin of Maximov tested, and we do know that Maximov's a pretty reliable wrestler grappler, and he has shown decent cardio. He has shown that he can continue to hit takedowns as the fight progresses, and he does push a pretty solid, grappling heavy pace. So I do feel that as the fight gets extended, we start to maybe favor Maximov a little more should he be able to get out of that first round. But on the other hand, I do think that Soriano's got, a lot of room for improvement. We could see him start to pace himself a little better, especially coming out after that Allen fight where, he had a solid first round, but he was slowing down a lot because he was taking a lot of body shots. And on top of that, he was putting a lot into the shots early. So he just did not have enough in the tank to keep it going for the final 2-3 rounds. But I do think if Soriano has, made those improvements, worked on his cardio a bit, worked on pacing himself a bit, he could probably put on a much better performance. We could just see him look to keep the fight standing in the first 2 rounds, defend the takedowns, and just do enough on the feet to win those first couple of rounds. But we haven't really seen Soriano make those improvements. And at the end of the day, I don't know if I want to lay the minus minus 200 on Soriano in hopes that he's made those improvements, or in hopes that he gets that early knockout. But overall, I do still favor Soriano to get the win here. I think grand scheme he's got a little more upside, but right now he still is a pretty green fighter, honestly, and just does not really warrant the minus 200 price tag. I'm still picking him to win, but if anything, I think Maximov might be the side in terms of betting. I think that Maximov by decision might not be too bad, because if he is able to survive that early storm of Soriano, able to take his best shots, we could see the wrestling of Maximov start to take over. We start to see him, really pick it up in the second and third rounds, and be able to win just based off of getting enough control time, because we see Soriano slow down, not be able to defend the takedowns, and maybe just accept bottom position as the fight progresses, and we see Maximov just kind of squeak out a decision. But ultimately, I do feel that Soriano's got knockout upside, and I do think with the proper improvements, he could win a decision as well. So official pick is Soriano, but I can't hate a poke on the Maximov side. And in the main event, we have Jack Hermansson versus Sean Strickland. Strickland's the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Hermansson is plus 170. Very fun matchup here. Very interesting clash of styles. We have, Striker and Strickland against very solid submission grappler in Hermansson. But, we'll start with Hermansson here first. So, like I was saying before, he is a very strong submission grappler. His stand-up is, I'd say, pretty mediocre. I mean, it's nothing great, but it's not terrible. Very meat and potatoes. But we have seen him struggle against, I'd say, decent strikers with good takedown defense. Just right off the bat, he struggled a bit against the likes of Vettori. He was getting outstruck by Shabazian early in that fight before he was hitting takedowns. Obviously, he's gotten knocked out by guys like Cannonier and Santos. But outside of that, he's actually fought a lot of other grapplers, right? He was able to get that early heel hook against Gastelum. But, he's fought guys like Souza, David Branch, Mearshart, Latest, all guys who are other grapplers as well. And he was able to beat those guys. But overall, Hermansson, he is very dangerous on the ground. He's got a very strong submission game. He's got good ground and pound as well. He's got submissions over guys like Mearshart, Branch, and Latish. But, he's going to have to get this fight to the ground first in this fight. And, I do feel it's going to be kind of tough. Strickland, he's got pretty good takedown defense. And Strickland does have pretty good submission defense as well. And then on top of that, I do feel Hermansson's a little outmatched on the feet. I do think his chin's a little shaky. He's been knocked out a couple times before. And even someone like Vettori was able to drop and hurt Hermansson early. So, Strickland, not exactly a big power puncher, but, he does bring a good volume and good pace, and he does have, a pretty solid, 5-round striking cardio. So, I guess we'll continue on with Strickland here. He is mainly a boxer. He does have a pretty strong pressure-heavy style. He's got good output and pace. We've seen him, go 5 strong rounds, putting out a really solid pace. But yeah, like I was saying before, he doesn't have like phenomenal one-punch knockout power, but he does do very good attritional damage. He's kind of just good at pumping out, shots at around 70-80% power and just peppering his opponents and then just mixing in the power shots occasionally. And I do feel that in prolonged striking exchanges, I could see him hurting Hermansson, possibly even getting like a TKO. Just from accumulation of damage. But, I will say this, though. Strickland, he's not particularly great at cutting off the cage. A lot of the times he's kind of just following his opponents around in there. He does keep his hands low at times, and, Hermansson does have a pretty sneaky head kick. That said, though, overall, I do feel Hermansson's a bit outmatched on the feet. And if this does play out, over extended periods of time, I can potentially see Strickland hurting Hermansson pretty badly here. But, the cardio of Strickland checks out. And like I was saying before, I do think his takedown defense checks out as well. We've seen him, defend a few takedowns from Usman. And I'd say Usman's a significantly better wrestler than Hermansson. And, Usman did win that fight pretty convincingly against Strickland. But, he did have to go to a bit of just cage pushing, wall install. He was able to take Strickland down a few times and control him there, but Usman, I think, is a much more powerful wrestler, and he is much more focused on control, whereas Hermansson is a bit more, ground and pound heavy and submission heavy with his grappling. But I do feel Strickland has shown, pretty solid takedown defense overall, and pretty good get-ups and submission defense. So I do feel this is a pretty tough matchup for Hermansson. I guess the real question mark is just how good the submission defense of Strickland really is, because I don't think he's really faced a high-level submission grappler like Hermansson. But if it does check out, I see this being a pretty tough night for Hermansson, because I really don't see Hermansson having too much success or prolonged success on the ground. I don't see Hermansson being able to take Strickland down and hold him down for more than 2 rounds and have, significant control time there as well. So if that's the case, I do favor Strickland pretty heavily here. I think Strickland wins by a pretty decent margin on the feet, and we could potentially see a knockout as well, because I do think that the chin of Hermansson is a little shaky, and Strickland, while he doesn't have phenomenal power, he can continuously touch that chin, and we could potentially see Hermansson's chin get cracked here. So the pick is gonna be Strickland for me here. I'm pretty confident, actually, that Strickland gets it done. It really will just come down to his takedown defense and defensive grappling, but I do think that's going to check out here, and I think he's going to be able to do enough on the feet to win a pretty clear decision, or at least get the knockout here. So I'm gonna go with Strickland here. I think it plays out. I think it should play out pretty similarly to the Hermansson Vettori fight. Vettori, I'd say, is not as good of a striker as Strickland, but I do feel overall, Vettori is probably the more well-rounded fighter. But I do think that Strickland should be able to keep it standing and win a pretty dominant decision.